Hi everyone. Today I just wanted to feature a replay I played in my Dallas. Now, this game is not going to be about my damage score. It's not going to be about the Dallas. It's not going to be about any amazing clutch plays I make. It's just about making the right decision to try and save the game instead of padding your stats. So, in this game, I'm going to have a major choice to make that is going to affect whether or not we win or lose the game, and I'm going to choose to sacrifice my stats for the team. So, here's how this is going to play out, basically. I'll talk a little bit about the Dallas in a little bit too, just to give you a little bit of background on what the ship is. But basically, what's going to happen in this game is most of our team is going to push into the enemy base and kill themselves, and myself, an Atlanta, and a Destroyer are going to be left defending the cap alone against a bunch of tier 8s. So, with that all out of the way, let's talk a little bit about the Dallas, just so you have a bit of perspective on what this ship is all about. So the Dallas is kind of your stereotypical light cruiser. You have 10 guns. They're 152mm guns. They have really high shell arcs and really low shell velocities. So what that means is you're basically a typical HE spammer. You have these huge arcs, and what you do is you sit behind islands and you spam HE over them. And so that's what I'm going to try and do in this game. I'm going to make a pretty stupid play in about a minute, which I'll point out and tell you why it's a stupid play. But it's not going to punish me too hard, and we're going to stay alive and hopefully win the game. So at this point in the match, I'm kind of just thinking about, well, I think I want to try and farm damage, and I think I want to farm these battleships as they push through, and I want to try and avoid playing too aggressively, because if one of those battleships looks at me funny, I might die. That's just kind of life in the Dallas. Especially in a tier 8 game, you're so fragile that enemy battleships will just insta-gib you from any angle if they get lucky. And that's just kind of how the Dallas plays. Really, you should play it pretty safe in every match, but especially at tier 8, so many of the enemy ships are so good that it's hard for you to really play aggressively in the Dallas. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to try and farm these guys as they push through. There's going to be a Normandy and a Scharnhorst that I'm going to try and shoot. But at this point in the game, I'm looking at the minimap and I'm thinking, all right, our team is kind of waffling around in the east. They're not anywhere near the enemy cap. They're not in positions that allow them to push into the cap. They have a Chapayev standing in between them and the cap, and the enemy team has battleships outflanking our team that are going to prevent us from moving into their cap circle until we deal with those battleships. Meanwhile, on the west, they have 4 ships with nothing standing between them and the cap circle. They have a full health Massachusetts, a New Orleans, and a Cleveland, who I think is also pretty much full health, and a Fubuki. And they're already almost in the cap circle. So we have many ships to kill, and we're far away from the cap before we can cap. Whereas the enemy team basically has nothing between them and the cap circle, and they have a bunch of full health ships. So I'm thinking at this point, all right, I want to win this game. How do we win this game? We have to defend the base. Right, even though it's me and my tier 6 Dallas against a Massachusetts, a New Orleans, and a Cleveland, and I may very well die, I recognize that if I don't go back and defend the base, we may very well lose because the enemy will cap long before we do. They just got into the cap circle, and our Kuchezov is just now pushing in. And if their battleships get lucky salvos, they'll just delete the Kuchezov, so he may not even get there. So anyway, I get citadeled by the Normandy because you may have noticed the stupid play I made was pushing around that island and accidentally going broadside on in front of 2 battleships whose only targets was me. So that was pretty dumb, but luckily I didn't get punished because Dallas armor is a little weird in that it's so fucking thin that you get overpens sometimes, which is not reliable, but is nice when it happens. So anyway, I'm now the closest thing to the enemy to our cap circle, and I'm just trying to reset these guys. I'm just trying to defend the base, right? Like, our Fubuki is basically it, and me and this Atlanta, and that's basically it defending our cap circle against a Cleveland, a New Orleans, and a Massachusetts who's full health. So at this point, what would have happened if I had chosen to pad my stats instead? Now, what would that decision have looked like? I could have just pushed with the rest of my team and pushed into the enemy base. I might have done more damage because I would have been able to farm those battleships and farm the Chapayev with my HE, but here's the catch. We probably would have lost, because if I'm not here, the enemy team is maybe halfway capped by now. And that's just not a situation that's sustainable, because then when the Massachusetts enters the cap circle, they probably potentially cap out. But if I go back and defend the base instead of pushing into the cap circle, I may risk death much more imminently, but I can guarantee that we don't get our base capped, as opposed to rolling the dice and hoping that we cap the enemy base. Now, the reason that's rolling the dice is because capping is intrinsically more difficult than defending, right? So if you're trying to win by capping as opposed to winning by defending, winning by capping is a risk because all the enemy team needs to do is get 1 or 2 shots into you over a course of like 2 minutes to completely stall your cap effort. So if you're trying to win by capping out the enemy base, you essentially need to guarantee that the enemy can't shoot you in that time period, and especially since we don't have any destroyers in the area, that's going to be really, really hard. Meanwhile, if you're trying to defend, it's way easier to guarantee that you win by defending. Ideally, our whole team would come back and defend the base. And the reason for that is that if our whole team comes back to defend the base, what happens? We fight their 4 ships, we destroy them because we outnumber them like 2 to 1, and then we flex around and deal with the rest of the enemy team. Whereas if our whole team goes to try and cap, we potentially throw the game because we all push into the cap circle and just get farmed by the enemy ships there. So I've chosen to save the game instead of my stats and try and defend the cap circle because I think that defending the cap is going to be the more secure way of winning the game. I may kill myself doing this, but the longer I can keep the base, the better. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm just pushed into this position. I'm just going to sit behind this island, and I'm just going to farm these guys. So you'll notice now that almost all the ships that pushed into the enemy base have now died. They just have the Megami. Our Richelieu actually turned around and came back to defend, which is awesome. So that guy ends up making a really, really good decision and peels away from the enemy cap circle. He could very easily have pushed into the enemy base. He maybe wouldn't have capped, but he would have been able to farm the Scharnhorst and the Normandy and maybe done more damage than he ended up doing. But he instead chooses to come back and defend the base, and that's going to win us the game. So at this point, the enemy push into our cap has been completely just stalled out, right? They lost 2 of their ships are leaving the cap circle. Any hope they had of capturing at this point is almost totally lost, which is exactly what we wanted to happen, and that's why we decided to fall back and defend the base rather than push into the enemy cap. So at this point, I'm thinking, all right, I have decent damage, but I want to make sure we win the game, so I'm not going to play too risky, right? I could play really risky, charge into the Cleveland, and get like 10,000 more damage. But, on the other hand, if I do that, the Cleveland could just kill me, and we might lose the game. And you'll actually see later that me pushing into the Cleveland at this point would have thrown the game. So instead of pushing into the Cleveland to get damage, like I kind of want to, I recognize that this game is close enough that if I do that, there's a very real possibility that I die, and if I do die, we're probably going to lose just on points. So I need to stay alive. If I just let this Cleveland go, the Richelieu and the Atlanta are going to kill him, right? Even though they're going to get that damage and I won't, if I kill myself now, we probably lose. And I'll show you what I mean by that later. So anyway, this Cleveland is going to die. And then in a few seconds, the Megami and the Richelieu are going to die. And it's going to be left in a situation where the Atlanta and I are 2v1 against a Normandy. So anyway, this Atlanta is just going to kill the Cleveland. And that's going to be that for him. But I just want to highlight that the really important takeaway from this game is whether or not you should cap or defend the base. If you aren't sure in a game, like if you're not sure what you should be putting into a decision to try and cap or defend, because it is very, very situational. Like, I can't give you a 5-minute summary of when to cap and defend because there are all sorts of exigent circumstances under which it's better to cap. But here's the thing. Most of the time, it's better to defend, and this is why. Because as I pointed out, defense is so much easier than capping. Because to defend, all you need to do is put in a couple salvos. To attack a cap, you need to guarantee you don't get shot at. And in warships, that is really, really hard to do. Especially without a destroyer as there was in this game. Okay. So at this point, I'm thinking, all right, they have a Normandy, we have 2 cruisers. We could push into him and try and kill him. But if we do that, there's also a chance that one of us dies or a chance that both of us dies. And that's not a chance I'm willing to take. Because if we take that chance, we risk throwing the game, and I want to win. I want to win this fight. Because I had an okay damage game in a tier 8 game, which is always nice. So essentially, the next 4 minutes of this game are literally just the Atlanta and I just running away from the Normandy because we don't want to take the chance of getting killed. I actually ask in chat how much HP is the Normandy on, because if the Normandy is on like 1,000 hit points, it doesn't matter. And then the Richelieu tells us that the Normandy is on most of his hit points, which means that we stand a real chance of dying if we try and fight the Normandy at this point. So what's going to happen is we're just going to stay away from the Normandy for the rest of the game, and we're just going to try and survive. And in so doing, we're going to win. So I'm just going to quickly fast forward now to the end plates just to kind of show you the result and sort of unpack a little bit about what was significant about this game. So here are the end plates when they load. So right away, you'll notice I wasn't super high on my team. I was 5th, which is okay. That's like a decent score. But I could have done more. I could have potentially had more damage in this game. The problem is if I had done that, I would almost certainly have lost, because if I had chosen to farm damage instead of going back to defend the base, I probably would have thrown the game, because we wouldn't necessarily have defended the base, and we would have just gotten capped out. And this is why it is always better to defend the base, almost always. Again, as I pointed out, there are some circumstances where it's better to try and cap. But it is almost always better to defend the base rather than push into the cap. And if you're in a situation, if you're not sure about when those situations are, because they are very, very situational, it's very much a case-by-case basis. If you're not sure about that, just default to defending the base, and eventually you'll start to learn what the circumstances are under which you should be pushing into the enemy cap. Obviously, if you're up like 9 ships, in that case, you should probably just try and kill the enemy team rather than capping. Like, even if you're super far ahead, don't fucking cap, because there's no reason to. Because if you're super far ahead and your team plays well, you'll win the game anyway, and you'll get damage. Whereas if you're behind or equal and both teams are capping, you want to be defending the base. Because if you try and cap, there's no guarantee you can cap out, but if you try and defend, there is a guarantee that you will defend for at least a period of time. So that's the broad takeaway from this game. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, give it a like and subscribe to my YouTube channel. I'll hope to see you guys all next time.